Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
All right. And I'd like to welcome you all to the Healthy Living podcast brought to you by Willow Creek Springs. I'm Joe Grumbine. I'll be your host. And we have with us today, Erin Wilkins, a very special guest. She has been on the show before, introduced herself as a registered nurse who runs a wellness clinic in Idaho. And she's sort of a Jill of many trades. She works with a lot of natural healing modalities. Maybe that's, I don't know, there isn't really the right word for some of this as far as how to describe things, but she has sort of a whole human approach, mind, body, spirit, which is why we're happy to have her here on the Healthy Living podcast. Erin, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Doing great. It's a little bit warmer here in Idaho. I think we're getting into the 20s today. So,
all right. Yeah, we were having a little pre-show conversation about temperature and why I live in California and not in colder places of the world. I like to visit for brief periods, but man, I couldn't imagine shoveling snow just to get out. You know, our mountain communities are just in a disaster. You know, California gets a disaster every time anything happens. And, you know, we got some serious snow for the first time in a lot of years, and mountain residents are trapped, and they're just finally getting roads open. And in places like Idaho, that kind of stuff happens on the regular.
oh yeah. Yep.
Just part of living. So, Erin, last time we got to meet you and learn a little bit about your practice and your clinic and some of the tools that you use. Today, I would like to get a little deeper and you know, start looking at as you as a practitioner. First of all, you know, there's so many words people like to use to describe people that are in the healing arts. And, you know, some people call themselves medicine men or medicine women. Some people call themselves, you know, all these different terms. What do you like to call yourself or be called?
Yeah, I'm not a fan actually of titles because I think there's a positive or negative with it. And I think people can fling them around kind of as a crown when they may not be as experienced in that.
Right.
I don't mind being called a healer, probably that more than anything else. Fortunately, doing what I'm doing, the fact that I do have a nursing license does help give me some credibility, but I wish that it really wasn't that way in the world, that you had to have a license to seem like you're credible.
Well, you know, on some level, I totally agree with you. On other levels, you know, you get people that go around, you know, pretending to be surgeons and cutting into people. So I don't know. I wish, you know, there was a ministry of common sense out there somewhere that could make sense of it all. But, you know, I think the good thing is when you're dealing with natural modalities, you're not subject to practicing with or without any kind of a license. You know, it's common sense. They can't restrict us from eating food or consuming items that aren't poisonous. Like, they just can't stop us from doing this. So that's kind of cool. Now, when we spoke last time, we touched on a lot of topics, and I'm really curious because you have a lot of experience in some things that I've dabbled in and have studied a little bit. But, you know, as we mentioned the last time, you know, nobody's really a master because you can't be. There's too many things to know and learn, but you can get really good at a thing, and you can get really good at some things. And you were talking about you know, how you work with oils, and you compound different formulas specific to people. But there's a lot of things that are really important to that, because, you know, everybody's so different. and people are sensitive to things, and people react better or worse to things. And so why don't you get in a little bit to your methodology as to you could have a set of twins or triplets come in and they might all have a stuffy nose, but all three of them might have a different course of treatment that would be needed, even if they were genetically identical.
Yep. So yeah, a lot of what I really enjoy doing right away is when someone comes with especially if it's a physical or mental condition, I love to do allergy testing for at least a basic food panel right off the get-go. What we eat goes into the gut, goes straight to the brain. And so a lot of your anxieties and depressions, or even simple rashes, can all be attributed to what we're consuming. And a lot of people don't take the time to realize. They'll try to eat healthy and say like, oh yeah, I know I shouldn't have sugar and I shouldn't eat fast food. But what if they're allergic to corn and they've been eating a lot of corn and it's causing an inflammation, and then it's exhibiting, whatever. Each person will exhibit differently. So I always like to run people through that first, to try to decrease the inflammation before I get, deeper into what's going on.
So I grew up with, I was born with allergic bronchitis and bronchial asthma, and I dealt with allergies all my life. And I've been in and out of allergists and pulmonologists. That's actually what brought me into herbal medicine, because I didn't like what they did to me. And when they went to go test you, they did what's called a scratch test, and they would put this little grid on your arm or your back or wherever they were to do it, and then they'd scratch you with these little needle-like things that were tipped with a small amount of that thing that you may or may not be allergic to. And when it gets under your skin, your body's either going to react or not to it. And after half an hour or however long they made you sit there, some of those items would swell up and make welts, and others would not have much of a reaction at all.
Yeah.
When you're talking about allergy testing, what's your way of testing?
Definitely not anything like that. That
Good.
To me is so archaic and barbaric.
Yes.
And I've had
Horrible.
kids as young as 18 months that they've done scratch tests on them, and I'm just horrified by some of the stories that I'm hearing. And I went through it as well. When I was a teenager, I was allergic to everything under the sun and had my back scratched probably 120 times. And anytime you're scratching something into your back, you're going to react somehow. Yes. So I think that you're told that there's a lot more that you're allergic to than you are, and then you're given a medication that you're meant to inject, which has its own side effects. But so I kick it back. There's a lot of people that will do muscle testing, which holding the compound of whatever you're allergic to, you stretch your arm out and your muscles react positive or negatively to whatever it is that you're holding.
Really?
A lot of chiropractors do that. A lot of you find that in also just like some of your more holistic type places will do that to test if you are allergic to something or not. So I always felt that, yeah.
When you're doing that, I've never had that done, so I'm really curious, and obviously I'm going to want to try it.
Yeah.
But are you having them actually hold the item that they might be allergic to, or is it in a jar, or is it dried or live, or how does that work?
Yeah, a lot of times people just prepare like in little bottles, everything that they're testing for, and then you hold it, stick your arm out, the arm that you're not using, and they just use a 2-finger approach to slightly push on the wrist. Your arm will go weak if you're having a reaction to whatever it is that you're holding. It's just the frequency within whatever that is not reacting well with your body.
Oh, interesting. So it doesn't matter if it's in a glass jar or anything. It's that the frequency is going right through you and your body's going, heck no, I don't want anything to do with it.
Yep. Wow. So, and you can do it the same way if they're testing an herbal compound on you to see if that's something that's beneficial. If you grow strong, when they push. I've found that, it works. It could be when my arm is stretched out for long periods of time, I find myself, I'm going to start going weak. And so I just felt like it was a little subjective. So I made rods that open and shut to the degree of allergy. So if someone has consumed a food, corn, gluten, sugar, your body will retain a memory of that. So I don't actually need you to hold it. If I'm working with a child that's never eaten corn, I'll get a can of corn, have them hold the corn. I did it with a little 2-year-old that had never had tuna fish, and we were testing on fish. So I just grab a can of tuna and have them hold it. The rods will open and shut. And what I like about that, it doesn't give you necessarily, you're allergic to this or you're not allergic to this, but it gives you the degree. So if I'm taking people on like a food cleanse and doing a food elimination diet, I know exactly what foods to put back in first based on the degree of how good that food was or was not for them.
Interesting. And, these days you hear a lot of talk about, organic and GMO and, I'm wondering, glyphosate and all these different compounds that are being farmed with. And I can't help but wonder sometimes, we talked a little bit of last time about, our diet and that we eat food from all over the world now, where, 10,000 years ago, we didn't get any food that was farther than you could walk. And, I can't help but wonder if that doesn't apply to farming techniques and that sort of thing as well, when it comes to things like if organic to me is kind of a weird word because people abuse it, but food that was grown well, as opposed to food that was grown rife with chemical, pesticides, herbicides, whatever.
Yep.
What's your thoughts on that? I mean, like, if we're eating food that's heavily processed, there's a good chance that the quality of that food, even at its source, is not very good. Whereas if we're eating maybe that same food, but your neighbor down the road grew it, how do you make sense of that?
Yeah, and that's a huge one. There's like what they call the dirty dozen, the clean dozen, the foods and the fruits and vegetables that you should absolutely never eat unless they're organic or non-sprayed. And then the ones that are okay just because of the leaching capacity of the pesticide. So I first started looking into it when I would eat a pineapple that was organic and not sprayed, and I'd be fine. As soon as I ate a non-organic pineapple, my throat would swell shut. So whatever was sprayed on things started being what I was allergic to, not necessarily the food.
Right.
So I do that a lot with people. If they have a milk allergy, I'll say, okay, well, let's test you on organic milk that doesn't have hormones for those cows. And a lot of times people aren't allergic to milk, they're allergic to the hormones. So you can, break it down. Around here, corn is a huge crop in Idaho, but unfortunately, all of the GMO and non-organic corn has a bug, a little parasite that's kind of injected into it, and what it will do is it'll eat the guts of any like bug that tries to eat the corn.
Right.
So then when you eat it, it eats holes in your gut. So you get a lot of leaky gut syndrome and things like that from corn.
Wow. And I was always told BT was safe.
Ha! I think we're told a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's part of the that's part of what this show is all about. It's interesting. Well, I won't get into it, but I was under the impression that something was a certain way. I was acting on it. My wife was too. And then she just got a sort of a general blood test back, showed her cholesterol was high. And I know why. And it was this thing we were doing that was supposed to be okay. And I was a little concerned that it might not be. And it turns out, well, if you're not fasting regularly, it's not going to be okay. And you think to yourself, okay, well, that's sort of good information along with some real important information that was left out. And so, that's a big part of why these discussions to me are so important, that we're getting a broad spectrum of experience coming across, because we live in this world of one-line messages, right? Talking points. And, you get this repeated over and over drumbeat messages, and people just they just repeat it. And they're like, oh, well, this is good. This is bad. I do this because it's good. And you're like, well, wait a minute, it's not that simple. And so what do you, when you're doing these allergy tests, I know you, over the years, you've been doing this. Are you finding that people are more and more allergic to things, or do you think that there are certain things that people are more allergic to, or is it just all over the place?
I find that it's getting worse only because the spraying has gotten worse. I think back in the day, even when the way that they processed wheat was processed in such a way, like almost a fermentation process, and your body knew how to, consume that and process it well. It's getting to the point now, speaking of wheat, that the question's not to ask if you're gluten intolerant, but it's how gluten intolerant are you?
Right.
It's been shown it smashes our intestinal villi the way that it's produced currently. So you're going to have some sort of a reaction, even if you don't necessarily feel it right away. And I just think that that's just getting worse. And the soil's getting depleted. They're not, replacing the soils after they grow potatoes and spray everything and then turn it back around, and they keep doing it over and over. And the soil's just starving for nutrients. So I think you're getting
what happened to 7 years fallow, rotating fields. I don't hear of that really ever happening anymore.
No.
Too much expense to move water systems around, I think.
Yep.
So I think that even gluten to me is like the tip of a giant iceberg. Gluten is I think it's a protein, right? It's a compound that a plant produces for a particular reason that's useful to the plant. It really doesn't have anything to do with us. But there are other compounds, more and more people are coming aware of, plant-based diets, veganism, vegetarianism, even just being aware of a healthy diet that's not the food pyramid of the 70s. That was brought to you by Kellogg's, right? And people don't realize it was the grain companies telling us what to eat. And go figure, there was grain involved, right? And but the thing is although I believe a generally a more plant-based diet is generally more healthy, that there are chemicals, compounds that plants produce that most people are sensitive to on some level or another, simply because the plants make those compounds so that we don't eat them. And there's compounds called lectins that a gluten is one, but there's lots of them. There's dozens and dozens of them that most people, I think, are in some way allergic to. And allergic just means you're sensitive. I mean, there isn't really a strict definition that can be quantified. It's just, if you find that you have a negative reaction when you go around this thing, you're probably allergic, right?
Yep.
And you started talking about an elimination diet. I remember, when I was a kid and I was going through this allergist, really there wasn't a whole lot of food allergies, but I had, as I do today, kind of a constant stuffy nose. Just, I was always allergic enough to certain things that just caused that. And, but it used to be a lot worse. And that was one of the things that the allergist said, well, let's eliminate some things from you. And the first thing they eliminated was milk. And then it was, I think, chocolate and peanut butter. There was a few things that they said, well, let's take these away and see if you don't get better. And I think, like most people, milk tends to make us a little more stuffed up. I think it's a fairly common thing to happen, and it was the same with me. But when you start eliminating items, like how far back do you go? Like, do you strip people down to a, bone broth and broccoli diet? Or, I mean, how do you do it?
It depends on what their problem is and what they need to do. I had one person that I was working with that kept getting almost like a fungus rash on the feet.
Whoa.
We ended up finding that it was gluten. It was a gluten reaction. But I took off of, no grains, no sugars, no dairy. Usually it's just kind of like a pretty bare bones vegetables and meat, just kind of strip it back to that, unless they're showing that they're allergic to meat, which could be the hormones. So there's certain meats, depending on gender too, that are good or not so good. And then depending on the person. So
yeah, there's a saying that I came across a few years back that, the old saying is you are what you eat, but the reality is you are what you eats. And so if the meat that you're eating is eating, GMO grain with glyphosate, well, guess what you're eating?
Yeah.
And even though it gets processed, it gets stored. And I practiced over the last few years. I've reduced the amount of meat that I eat, but I love meat and I'm not going to ever quit. But I found a good source of meat that was, farm raised, and I have people that I know that raise meat and butcher it themselves. So I've shifted almost primarily, unless I go to a restaurant or something, to meat that I know what it ate. And I've noticed a difference in how I feel. And it's hard to pinpoint what did what, but I can imagine, like, if you come upon somebody and they've got this problem, like, well, what is the most common problem that somebody comes to you with? If that's even a question that you can answer.
Oh goodness, depression and anxiety are probably some of the top ones.
Okay. And so when you initially are looking at diet as a source of a problem, which is where, obviously these could be very compound problems that maybe have a source and then all these other aggravating factors. And if you can start eliminating the problem, then it can probably start getting better, I would imagine. But I would imagine if somebody came to you and you automatically, your process is, well, let's look at diet as just part of the evaluation. And when you find out that somebody, do you do like a survey? Do you ask them a bunch of questions about what their diet is?
Sometimes, if it's a depression type issue, I'll just say, what types of things are you eating? But a lot of times I just get down to the bare bones. Let's find out what you're allergic to or what you're not. If it's specific to depression, there's certain things I already know. They shouldn't be having gluten. They shouldn't be having sugar, but it's good for them to see the rods go to tell them no, rather than me just say, yeah, you probably shouldn't have these things. But so that's helpful. And then I try to get that inflammation down a little bit. So if they are on any medications for that, then we can pull them off of that. And then get them some sort of an herbal supplement or something else in their diet. If they're not getting the minerals and nutrients that they need, that would be when I would ask more pointed questions. What are you eating breakfast, lunch, dinner? And do we need to, have a multi-mineral that you're consuming, or are you even getting any vitamin C or D? Things like that.
Yeah, it seems like, the nutritionist part of your process it could be a huge part of it. There's people that spend, huge amounts of time just consulting about, just that, finding that right diet. And then you mentioned sort of a factor that comes into everything, really, and especially to most people today, is what other medications are they taking? And then potential interactions between, their diet and that medication, or maybe even just side effects from medication they're on. It seems like you've got a really big puzzle to solve before you even get going. I really want to see these rods. now you've got me very curious. I'm gonna require a treatment here pretty soon, I'm sure. I and you developed these?
No, they were recommended how to make them through Energy Polarity. It's a company that I've done a lot of my energy studies with. So they talked about in one of the books that they'd written about how to make these. You can use them to find water with, you can use them to sense negative or positive energy, and then you can also use them but then I started using them for allergies and foods and my medication compounds.
Is this like a tuning fork looking thing?
Here, let me grab them. I've got
okay, yeah.
I've got a pile of cats on me here, but
Oh yeah, that's all right. Piles of cats are cool.
Make my way to the other side of the office here.
Unless you're allergic to cats, then a pile of cats could be problematic.
Then it's not. So they are nothing. Whoops, fancy. They're falling apart as I'm trying to show. But anyway, they're just turn some not in the light. See that? So they're just pin caps at the end, and these are clothes hangers that are cut and then just put into the pin caps so that they will freely move right here.
Interesting.
So, yeah, they're just very, very simple. I do have a kind of a fancier rod that will go to the right for positive, go to the left for negative, and then it'll do like a figure 8 infinity symbol if it's an oscillating energy. It's just the movements are so small on that I found that it's a lot easier to use these.
That's like a pendulum that people use for spirit work, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, if you positive and negative words in the quantum mechanics realm hold a frequency and an energy. So yeah, anything like a metal necklace with anything hanging off it will move if you speak at it. So
yeah. It's pretty wild. Yeah, the quantum world is pretty wild. What about water? I would imagine your conversation with people that are new to this or trying to find out a source of a problem. What do you find as far as people being dehydrated or drinking things that are not helpful, or how does water play into this diagnosis?
Water's good, but you have to be drinking the correct kind of water. I think that if people are drinking just normal tap water, it's chock full of arsenic and fluoride and all sorts of amazing things. And so I will talk to people about doing like a reverse osmosis type system and then making sure that they get that. So many people run straight to sodas or coffees, and that just dehydrates you even more. I even had someone I was working with that was like, well, I'm getting my water in my beer that I'm drinking. I'm like, no, you're not.
Yep. Beer is a source of water. That's an age-old issue, right?
Yep.
Well, I guess it's better than whiskey, right?
I don't know. I guess it can go either way. Depends on how much you're drinking.
This is true. So what do you think about, and I guess this is a little bit off topic, but we're going down the water hole. There's a lot of people that are wild about this alkaline water. I have some misgivings about the idea of alkalizing your body by drinking water, but what's your thoughts on it?
I don't know a lot about it. I mean, I have heard about it and I just haven't really paid much attention, because as long as you're drinking a good water, that's what your body needs. I mean, you're going to be acidic or alkaline depending on your body itself, right, and also on the types.
Don't forget the hydrochloric acid in your stomach. That alkaline water is going to go rest in for a little while.
Yeah. So I do have a lot of people that I'll help get a little bit more less acidic with the foot detox. And so that will pull a lot of the acids out. And I think that that's probably a better way than consuming weird water. I mean, as long as you've got your,
So is there a thing that you find that the most, if there was one or two or three things, I know you mentioned that, there was this sort of number of items, but what, in your personal experience, what do you think the most sensitive thing people are, or the thing people are most sensitive to?
Gluten.
Okay. And it seemed that in years past, even when I was a kid, I think there was a lot more whole grains, or people were using, well, I don't know. I came from a weird family. My mom ground grain and made whole wheat herself. We were sort of Mother Earth news folks, and it was we were an odd bunch, but I don't know though. Actually, I mean, I grew up in the 70s, and that was kind of the, processed food entered the stage. It was all new and exciting and delicious, right? And so
Yep.
that was where I think everything really kind of went sideways, was right about that time. Fast food became easy and readily available and cheap. Mom started going to work, and kids were left to their own devices more and more. So I think, microwaves came out, everything became fast and easy. Packaged food, highly processed food is another thing that I hear a lot of, really negative, even carcinogenic properties. And so, most of the stuff that is easy to find is highly processed, and can't help but wonder, like you were saying, an ingredient you might be sensitive to it, but if you get it out of a can that was, processed a certain way, you might even be a whole lot more sensitive. Well, listen, I thought, as I suspected, we weren't going to get onto any additional topics. This is really an important topic, though. And I think that I can't help but wonder if regular old doctors, which there really aren't anymore, but general practitioners, pediatricians, if they weren't maybe a little more aware of, or took attention to address potential allergies, that if maybe a lot of the medicines that children and people in general were given could be avoided just by us sort of figuring out what's best, that we're consuming, for our own chemistry. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, doctors in this day and age, they're not taught nutrition. They don't understand it. It doesn't even enter into their scope of practice. And so, they have a purpose, and there's obviously, the things that they're doing are good as well. But when every person is so unique and individual. And so you can't have somebody go and say, I'm complaining of this or that. I've got stomach aches or this going on, and they immediately just put you on a medication to control the acid in your stomach. Well, it could be because you're eating whatever, or eating, even microwaving your stuff, which just molecularly destroys the food properties. And so you just may not even get what you're needing. And I think that piece is just, it's forgotten, and doctors don't know it. And it's unfortunate, because I think that there would be a lot less medical issues if we treated food as medicine, which is what it is.
Yeah, I can't help but totally agree with that. Well, listen, we're running out of time, but what I'd like to do, I think we're on a good progression, and I want to kind of pick up where we left off the last time, and maybe continue down this road of food, and sort of looking at, because what my hope is that somebody listening to this might think to themselves, I wonder if I just did that, and maybe took an action and said, well, what if I just eliminated some stuff that I know is probably toxic to me, or potentially that way, and maybe see how I feel. How long do you generally have somebody eliminate an item or items from their diet before you go back and start evaluating again?
It would depend on how allergic they were. I've had people that were super, super allergic to like tomatoes. And so they just knocked tomatoes out of their diet for a couple months. And then, you can always remuscle test. You can always come
Right.
back, see where your body's at. Oh, yep, it's looking like everything's going good. You're moving the right way. Go ahead and just, small amounts, introducing it back in. Usually allergies occurred because you've always had it, but you reach that one final straw on the camel's back and it just snaps and your body's like, and you just need a break, sometimes forever. And then sometimes it's just for a little bit.
When we come back on the next episode, I'm going to tell you a little story about poison oak and an experience I had and how your body can go from being completely resistant to something that a lot of people find toxic and then all of a sudden flip upside down and be highly sensitive to it. And, it's just at a drop of a hat. So, well, I am enjoying this conversation. I think that we're providing some good information for people to learn from and think about. And most importantly, let's think about these items that we're talking about. And Erin, I always want to give you an opportunity to let people know how to get a hold of you. And like I said, I'm actually getting ready to finally publish your bio, and then you're in queue for this thing to be published. So once we do, we'll put in your link to your site and all that. But just for the sake of listeners, how would somebody get a hold of you?
If they go on my site, they can pop me off an email that way, or phone usually works the best. Send me a text anytime, day or night, and I get back to everybody. So just let me know who you are, because I don't think some wackos texting me, but
there you go. All right, Erin.
Yep.
Well, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm going to give you a little parting shot and we'll wrap it up.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for having me, and everybody take care.
All right. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much.